Hi, thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Reed Colson. I'm a Senior Vice President with UDIG. I lead our data and analytics practice. A quick personal intro is that I've spent my career in and around data analytics. In the early days, I started modeling payment fraud for a payments company, and I quickly learned that every day in data was a treasure hunt. I've truly enjoyed the journey, and I've learned many lessons along the way, many of which I would like to share with you today around building a data strategy. So a little bit about UDIG. UDIG is a technology consulting firm. Our goal is, at the end of an engagement, is that we leave you better. We are headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. We have a growing office in Nashville, and we primarily serve clients across the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast with software, intelligent automation, and data services. So what I wanted to cover today was really to share my thoughts with you on building a data strategy that your C-suite will support. So for today, what I wanted to cover was, number one, why a data strategy is important. Two, what is a data strategy? Three, how do you build one? And last, how do you sell the data strategy to get the support you need to deliver against it? I like to start with why. When you talk to your C-suite, starting with why is a way to make sure that they're going to pay attention to your message. Like all of us, they're busy and they have a lot going on. And if you start off with what or how, they may not know why they need to listen to you. So in my experience, leading with why is a way that makes it very clear to your executives that data is an important topic, and it helps ensure that they will listen to your message. And so the first thing, I like to talk about is that data drives profitability. The reason you need a data strategy is really that being a data leader in any industry is an advantage that creates measurable financial benefits. Many studies have shown this. I've seen them from Bain, from McKinsey, from MIT, CISR, and more. I chose the one from Melbourne Business School for today that they partnered with A.T. Kearney on, is that they actually measured the financial lift possible as you advance the maturity journey of your organization in your organization's ability to use data and analytics. So for this, particular graphic, what it shows is 4 groups of companies out of a study that covered about 350 companies across industries and across the world. The firms were broken into 3 groups based upon their responses to a set of questions that indicated their capability and investment in data and capabilities. 7% of the respondents were categorized as laggards, 29% were followers, 48% were explorers, and 16% were identified as leaders. The profitability of leaders were evaluated relative to their industry. Same was done for each of the other groups. And what the study found is that if you're an explorer, you can see a 15% increase in bottom line profitability by moving from an explorer to a leader. Similarly, if you're a laggard and you move from a laggard all the way to a leader, that would translate into a 60% increase in profitability for your firm. But that doesn't say by itself you need a data strategy. It says that if you're good with data and analytics, if you've been successful with data and analytics, you're more profitable. So I'm going to quote another study here by McKinsey where they looked at what companies that were successful in data analytics attributed to their success. In this study, McKinsey put about 12 different dimensions in front of about 300 companies that were identified across the spectrum. And those that were good at using data and analytics to make decisions to run their organization said that in 2018, the #1 contributor to their ability to be good at using data and data analytics, or their success, was the fact that they constructed a strategy to pursue data and analytics. You have insurance senior management support is also important, but you can see that #1, having the ability to use data and analytics to effectively drive strategy improves your profitability. And here you can see that the #1 contributor to being good at that is having a strategy. So to recap, the why is really, if you want to be more profitable, you can get there by getting better at data and analytics. And the number one way to get there is to develop a data strategy. So now we have, kind of an understanding of why a data strategy is important and some information that you can use in your company to talk about building a data strategy. Let's talk about what one is. I've seen a number of times where folks are a little bit narrow in their definition of a data strategy. I've seen people point to their data architecture and say, that's my data strategy. Or they point to a tactical solution they're solving, like single version of the truth, or that there's a document that an executive has. Those aren't a data strategy. What a data strategy is a comprehensive plan to employ data and analytics to achieve critical business objectives. It needs to touch on 4 key concepts. It needs to hit the story, which in this case is really what you're going to be doing with data and why it's important. And it's written in a non-tech centric way. So those include things like your vision, your goals, your use cases, your success metrics. This is how the broader parts of the organization can understand what you're doing. It's going to cover oversight. And this is going to refer to the means and methods that you use to build and execute on the data strategy. It's who needs to be involved, how their activities are going to be prioritized, how your activities are funded, and how they're governed. You have that. Then you also have transformation. And this is where kind of a lot of the meat of what is actually going to change comes in. So this is, what are the requirements that you need with respect to how you're going to use data? What's the delivery methodology that you're going to use to get there? How do you go from current to target state? What's the architecture going to be? What's the roadmap going to look like? What's the data governance involved? And then lastly, but probably one of the most important pieces, is what about the people? What role do they play in the strategy? How are you going to manage them through the change? How are you going to provide the right training and communication? And how will they be organized? As you can see, this is a lot. But what I can tell you is if you only focus on 1 or 2 of these concepts, your data strategy is going to come up short, and you're going to leave a lot of unimportant questions answered. Excuse me, a lot of unimportant questions unanswered. So now that we've talked about, why you need a data strategy and what it is, the tendency is to just rush right in. Well, let's make sure that we keep a few best practices in mind before you get started. A data strategy really needs to serve the business strategy. It doesn't create value necessarily in and of itself, but it's there with the main purpose of helping the organization achieve its business objectives. So start by understanding your business strategy and where there are levers that the data strategy can support that business strategy. Second, another best practice is be thoughtful about who you approach for sponsorship and which key influencers you bring into the process. Your sponsor needs to be somebody who's willing to be an evangelist for the data strategy, and it's got to be somebody who has the influence to be able to get support across the organization. Similarly, your key influencers should be people who can provide good input and guidance. They'd be willing to advocate, but also somebody that you can have good two-way conversations with, so you can adjust and modify and iterate on that data strategy to make it the best it can be for the organization. While you're doing this, another best practice is to go wide. And I've fallen prey before to trying to just focus on the things that I know to try to manage scope. But what happens is that you end up having, alternate strategies spin up, and you have multiple data strategies going on at the same time, which really impedes your ability to drive the data capability for the organization. So number one, go wide, look at everything and talk everywhere, but you still need to focus the priority areas. By going wide, you bring everybody in. By focusing, you're going to be able to make sure the data strategy addresses those things that create the most value for your organization, but you've had all parts of the organization involved in making that determination. And then the last piece of advice I would share is that when you start to do this, you're going to find people who are pessimists or detractors. Those folks can become some of your biggest allies in this process if you work well with them. If there's somebody who's a pessimist or detractor, there's probably something that they're thinking about that the data strategy might either get in the way of or might not support. And if you can get them on your side, it becomes pretty visible that somebody that was perhaps very vocal against the data strategy is now all of a sudden in support of it. and that helps you create influence around your organization. So covering sort of why you need one and what one is, how do you build one, right? How do you start and put this thing together that's going to move your organization from where you are today to being a leader in using data and analytics to be able to drive your organization and set business strategy and make decisions? Well, a few recommendations. My first recommendation is to do this as a formal program. When we were talking about what a data strategy is, it should have been obvious that it is a fairly broad set of concepts that you need to cover that range from story to oversight to the technology and finally to the people. And trying to manage these all side of desk or sort of informally is a recipe or a formula for failure. And so setting up the strategy as a formal program, it does a lot of things for you. First, having a formal program is going to be useful to marshal the resources that you need to execute on all of those different concepts. It also provides a framework or a structure to be able to manage a wide range of stakeholders as well as delivery partners that may not be in your organization, but need to accomplish certain things to align to the goals that you're setting out. And so a data strategy run like this will probably have, I'll call two different sets of groups. One is the sort of steering group. This is going to be where the governance, the oversight, the authority, and often some of the funding will come from. It gives you a forum for communication to senior folks. It also gives you what I've found to be really important is milestone reviews, because this is a way to create accountability across the program, especially for folks that may not be in your organization or report to you, right? You make those visible commitments and everybody's held accountable to them, and this is a way to drive progress. Second, you're going to have a number of different working teams in all likelihood. So these will be folks that have the skills and ability to execute on the different parts of the program. These will probably be targeted across different domains. You'll have some technology groups, you'll have some process groups, you may have some governance groups, you may even have like reporting and analytics. And these are the folks who are going to be involved in interviewing to figure out requirements. They're going to do document and policy analysis. They're going to articulate your current and future state and be involved in creating your final deliverables. Those, again, will all report to you, and they'll be from all over the organization if you're doing this well. And again, that steering committee really will give you some of the oversight and authority to drive work through all of those different groups. So recommendation one is to set up the data strategy as a formal program. Second, my second recommendation is that you don't have to go it alone in building the data strategy. There are many resources and partners that you can engage that will increase your chances of success. You're not going to be the first organization that's building a data strategy. So there's a lot of content and material and individuals out there that can help you. I'm going to cover maybe three different ones that will be of use to you. So the first is think about the maturity models for data that exist. They provide an objective structure to evaluate the current versus desired state. It's going to give you a tested framework where you can look at data governance, data operations, data quality, how data sourcing happens, how data utilization looks. And this sort of tested and tried and true framework will add credibility to the program. Others will know what you're trying to evaluate, that it comes from best practice, and that it's not something that's being done at your whim. So using that framework will result in determining the current and desired end state across a number of different dimensions. While you're doing this, you're going to do work to assess the gaps across each dimension. So if we're at, say level one of awareness on data governance and data management, and you want to get to, well-defined, there's going to be benefits that you should get from that. Maybe it's better consistency of conformance of data as it's flowing into your warehouse. You should document those benefits and you should try to quantify them. It'll be useful for you later. And I'll touch on that in a minute. So one, this data model, the data maturity models are really useful. Second, consulting partners can accelerate the process and they can be a good resource for you. They've done many strategies and they can help you avoid spinning your wheels. They're going to have experience that's going to help you work through process. It's going to help you navigate potential pitfalls. And they can provide another source of credibility around your data strategy process. And lastly, they can often provide insights on how you may stand relative to your peers. So if you're looking only at yourself and you think, well, maybe we're a level 3, they can maybe give you some benchmarks and say, well, level 3 is really, X, Y, and Z. I think you might be more at maybe repeatable at this point. So those are two good ones. And then lastly, what I highlight is product vendors, right? So when you're doing your current target state architecture, you're going to identify, tools and vendors that you're going to want to work with. They're going to have a lot of technical documentation. You're going to be in the position of negotiating with them potentially for purchase, where you can get training included. And so again, keep in mind that there's lots of places that you can go for help. This will add credibility and help you get the data strategy completed in a slightly shorter time frame. And then the last thing is you're going to be building a lot of artifacts. So you're going to need to keep these organized. So think about that up front, whether it's your company's on a SharePoint or some other means, set up the structure by which you're going to keep these things together. I'll kind of highlight 4 different types of documents that you have here. Starting in the upper left, you're going to have a data strategy vision. I put an overly simplistic one here as an example, but it should be something that is telling your organization what the data strategy is hoping to accomplish. It should be in a very clear language. I would avoid any sort of heavy technical jargon. So basically emphasize why and what the value creates. In this case, I said ensure everyone can do their best work using data, right? And we get there by having data that's trusted and high quality, it's accessible and well documented, it's current, it's easy to use. A little bit overly simplistic. You'll probably want to reflect more of your business goals in your data strategy vision, and you're probably going to want to have some things that reflect value behind it as an example that shows some benefits through use case. Moving to the right, you may have a target state architecture. In all likelihood, these days it's going to be around the cloud. I have 2 examples here. One's from Microsoft, one's from Amazon. Both of these kind of give you an example of the type of high-level architecture that you're going to create. There's going to be documentation behind this that gets into more detail, but you're going to have a whole set of target state and current state architectures that you're going to need to keep organized. On the bottom left, you're going to have delivery plans, right? You're going to have a roadmap of activities that need to occur to go from, defining the data strategy to executing against it. And this is going to cover, your investments, your resources, your milestones, your timing, and that's important. And then last I have on here is organizational views. And so that first one, really there's essentially 3 ways to organize for data. One is, you're going to have it completely centralized. All of the work for data is going to come out of some centralized team. Well, the flip side of that is could also be completely federated. What I tend to see the most is some central coordination with local delivery. It's not always going to be straight up organization. It may also be committee structure. So I've got an example here as well of a data governance program that will show how different individuals across the organization will engage together on your data governance and how that operates and executes on a go-forward basis. But again, these are all examples of the type of artifact that you will create to help articulate and explain the data strategy. And the key piece of advice here is version control and organization. So make sure you can stay on top of all of these documents. So that gets us into the part that often is the hardest, which is selling the strategy. It takes a lot of work to build a good data strategy, and it's really disappointing when, after building the strategy, folks are unable to potentially get the support to execute against it. So having built the strategy, you're going to need resources and support to execute against it, and that's where selling the strategy to the C-suite comes in. That said, influencing that support and selling the strategy should have started at the very beginning. If you think back to the beginning of the presentation, I talked about careful selection of your sponsor and some of your influencers and a number of other things that we're doing. Those are really geared towards having folks along for the journey and being able to advocate and sell, such that when you get to the selling part here, it's not a lonesome exercise. So a few things. When we were doing this, we were beginning with the end in mind. Right, a best practice is to keep in mind how you're going to get that support for investment in time and resources. A couple of the things I've listed here are the things that you were doing upfront that will help you be able to get support for your data strategy. Right, so you're at the initial outset, because it's a formal program, required to look for executive sponsorship. hopefully what you did is you chose an executive that's going to benefit from the data strategy, so they have skin in the game. They have influence in the organization to get investment. And you should be able to tell maybe from their track record that they've been able to sponsor big initiatives before. They should be someone who's willing to be vocal and be an evangelist about the data strategy. And they should be someone who will stay engaged and provide you guidance on navigating the organization. A red flag would be talking to somebody who, is really influential in the organization. You can talk about sponsoring and they say yes, and then they start moving into, and you'll be working with, and they name somebody that's a level or two below them in their organization. You want to make sure that you can stay connected and close to them throughout the process, not only to keep them informed, but through, their career and their experience. They've got a lot to share and help you in terms of being able to make this a successful sell into the organization. It's sometimes a little bit intimidating to approach those people. One thing that I found that worked for me was, identified somebody that had sponsored something before. I went and talked to the individual that got them to do that, the one who convinced them to sponsor that initiative. And I asked them, hey, how'd you do that? What were they interested in? What made them tick? What were the things that they wanted to know? What did they want to do? And it made me a lot more comfortable in building the story to go talk to the individuals in a way that I knew we would get to a good outcome. Second, early on, we talked about defining metrics and highlighting the key strategy benefits along the way, right? This is where when you're talking about, going from current to target state, what changes and what do you get out of it? Those are important because one of the things that you'll be building here is a business case to help show the value of the data strategy. Those metrics and the key strategy benefits will be central to that business case. And then I think I spent a little bit of time on going wide and looking wide at the business challenges and opportunities, and then prioritizing that focus. And it does two things. It uncovers potential strategy partners, and it was another way to look for use cases with high potential return. So assuming that you began with the end in mind, that you've got a good executive sponsor, that you're tracking metrics and benefits along the way, you went wide, you have a good prioritization, you now start getting into the process of building the tools that you will use to sell the data strategy. You have all those artifacts that explains what it is. Now you need to get into why. Again, it's important. You will almost always run across individuals who are going to be completely business case driven in making their decisions. So you will need to craft a clear business case showing the value, along with the timing of the costs and the benefits of the data strategy. This is a example that I've made up, just a template that you can use. There's a lot of documentation that would go behind this. What you want to have is you want to have the objectives. You want to keep that front and center, letting everybody know why we're doing this, right? This is for us to be able to do our best work by making trusted data easy to find and use throughout all aspects of the organization. You'll probably have some summary of the analysis, right? And I tend to find that these are not one-year projects, they're 3 or 5. And in this case, I gave you a 3-year example. So let's say that this data program to execute on the data strategy is going to take 3 years. It's going to cost $5 million. We've been able to quantify benefits over those 3 years of $15 million. When you discount those cash flows back, and again, this is where finance can be a good partner for you, the net present value of this initiative is $7.5 million, and the ROI is 18%. These were made up numbers for my case, so don't try to back your way into them, but that's the kind of information that your stakeholders are going to want to see. They may also want to see it visually, so I gave you a few examples at the bottom of this, on the financials, showing the inflows and outflows along with the net change year over year. It's not unusual to find cases that have a negative value in the first year. So if yours does, don't be afraid. If it has a negative value for all 3 years, you have work to do. You're either prioritizing areas that don't generate value, or you're doing work that you don't need to do. So that would be a signal to go back in and rework your plan. The other thing I've seen folks want to look at is what is the internal versus external spend. And so that's the chart on the bottom right. And I did it by year. So internal might represent, associate spend for folks that are already in the organization. External might be software purchases, or it might be third-party resources that you bring in, say, contract data engineering resources to execute on new data pipelines. The last thing I'd highlight here is that there will also be benefits that maybe were hard to quantify, or you could quantify, but it was more of a forecast or an estimate than something that you were really willing to bake into a commitment. You definitely want to include these soft benefits in the business case and show them, but you want to make sure that your business case stands on the hard benefits alone. The soft benefits are going, if your case stands only on soft benefits, it's going to be a tough sell. So this is really going to speak to the folks who are really kind of financially oriented and making decisions. The second kind of, excuse me, document that you need is you need something that's going to speak to folks who like to envision the future, right? And this is where you focus on the benefits and help the key leaders in the organization visualize what tomorrow will look like relative to today and how that will benefit them. I've given you an example here on reporting. This is a pretty tangible one, and it's easy to visualize. So you could talk about, in today's environment, you guys know, you've told me that reporting is slow. It takes a long time to get. It's a lot of manual effort from your teams. It's often low quality, or 2 or 3 reports that are supposed to be the same thing have very different numbers. And give an example here. This is, our, monthly metrics report, and it's an eye chart. It's hard to read, and it's got a lot of information on one page, and it doesn't necessarily speak to you. Well, tomorrow, because we've been able to do the data sourcing and be able to push it into tools that will automate that report collection, the reporting is going to be fast. It's going to be automated. It's going to be easy to use because we've tried it with your teams, and it's going to be trusted because of the work that we've done to cleanse and govern our data. And so in this future state, you have an engaging interface that you can trust, and that kind of story helps get others on board that maybe yes, the financial results are there, but I really kind of want to feel how it's going to be different for me. And I'd suggest go through and look for some of these, and you might have a few different vignettes that you show on how tomorrow will be different than today. So you have your business case, you have your story, you have all your artifacts that say what you're going to do. Now it's about, how do you communicate this? And I've learned by experience that what you don't do is put it all together, get one meeting together and ask for approval. It is too unpredictable, and there's too many folks that could potentially take the conversation in a direction that you hadn't expected. Well, it would be nice if an organization has a single decision maker that says yes and things happen. What is probably more typical is you have a consensus, and to get a yes, it means nobody says no, or nobody important says no. So I don't believe you'll get the support you need in a single meeting. So I've sort of developed this notion of starting with my trusted partners and sort of working out across the folks that need to be involved in making the decision and iterating, so that I can get the feedback and kind of work through the process of getting them on board. So I'll start with my trusted partners. These are people who are close to me, that I've worked with for a while, that have influence in the decision. I share sort of my initial draft of the request to get support for the data strategy and the funding to execute against it. And they will give me feedback on things that maybe I was too focused on, I had jargon, parts they don't understand. I'll go work on it. It's important to openly and genuinely listen at this stage, because people are giving you feedback, and that feedback is gold. You might take it back to them and say, hey, did I address that concern you had? And they might say yes, or they might say no, and you continue to work. Well, you get the trusted partners, and then maybe the supportive executives are sort of the next level out of familiarity for you. And eventually you're going to get to, all the groups that you need to, including those potential detractors. And the idea here is that when you get to that decision-making forum, you've had conversations with everybody who's going to have an opinion in that room. If they have objections, what they are, how you might address them. And by the time you get to that meeting, you should already have the buy-in you need to get support to execute against the data strategy. So hopefully that was helpful. I know it was quick. There's a lot of information there. But in kind of wrap up, a few things that I would want you to take away from this, right? Creating a comprehensive data strategy is the key to successfully monetizing your data and driving profitability back into your company. Second, including the key influencers and sponsors early and often to shape the strategy and get their input will help influence their buy-in and make your job selling the strategies down the road much easier. Third, don't go it alone. There are lots of external resources that you can leverage that will build credibility, will make your job easier. It'll help you avoid risk, and it'll accelerate that strategy formulation. And then fourth, running the data strategy as a program is going to help orchestrate many pieces, and it's going to emphasize the importance of what you're doing. It'll also give you the authority you need to be able to drive activity across groups that may not report to you. And my final thought is that the data strategy is a living document, and it should be revised on a regular basis. If you go back to what I said first, is that the data strategy has to support your business objectives, and business objectives change. Therefore, your data strategy will need to keep up. I appreciate the time. If there's anything that I can do for you, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to follow up. Thank you and have a great day.